Thanks everyone for joining. It's really nice to see a bunch of you here. Yeah, I head up all kind of things people at Planes. We're a digital product studio, so essentially we make apps, web apps, things like that. And something I'm really passionate about is making sure that I create a workspace that is inclusive for a lot of people. We have teams that identify as neurodiverse, who are carers, who are parents, and it's like creating a space that works for everyone and kind of allows for a lot of choice in how you determine your workday, which I think is super important.
And you're a relatively small team at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, we're only about 30-ish. When I joined, coming up to 2 years ago, we were like 7. So we scaled a little bit, and we'll probably get to maybe like the 40-50 mark in the next year or so. So nothing insane on the scaling side, but more of like a slow and steady growth.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I suppose you'll be experiencing some of the challenges that lots of us will face, that we don't have an endless budget to do lots of really glamorous things, but how can we do the right thing and foster that really kind of flexible environment? And when we were speaking yesterday, I thought it was really interesting when I was asking you for your kind of definition, or how would you describe flexibility? You talked a little bit about choice and the role that choice plays in it. So I don't know if you're kind of, to set the scene, perhaps share a little bit more about your take on what flexibility is, but also where choice comes into that at Planes.
Yeah, of course. So I think flexibility as its term is great, but a lot of people think that's like you can start your day earlier, you finish it earlier, or like some things around that. But there's more of a choice around preferences, I think, a little bit. Like we've kept our office to be hybrid because some people do like being in there, some people like the actual like interaction you get from being in person, but some people work better remotely, and that's fine. And I think we've kind of had a quite good success in the fact that we haven't got mandated days in, and we haven't like forced any rules around it, and it's actually enabled a lot more trust within the team about whether they can design their days and how they can do it. Also celebrating people do things that you allow, I think, is super important. The point you make on the new legislation that comes in, it's very like requests can take 2 months and all these things that, you know, I'm probably cynical about it too, but it means that it feels like there's barriers still, whereas it's, you know, it should be something that people feel empowered to do rather than like a ton of hurdles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize that the legislation is a good thing,
For sure,
but it's just not enough. And I kind of reflect back to my early days as a people manager, and I cringe at many of the things that I did and have learned from. But this assumption that flexible working was part-time, and you know, I still work part-time now, and I think there was this perception that part-time meant part-asked, but actually it just means less hours for less pay, equally as valuable. But we know that flexible working is so much more than just that. What are some of the kind of, again, whether that's at Planes or just more generally speaking, what are some of the things that you would say play into this concept of having a flexible culture?
I think understanding people's preferences from day one and making sure that they're kind of checked in on. Like when we kick off project teams, we have everyone do a team canvas, which is a super nice exercise, which basically talks about like your values, your preferences. And I always like nudge people to think about like preferences and the fact that if you have to do like pick up or drop off, that means you don't want to stand up at 9:30 per se, like things like that, that if you have from the get-go, that's all agreed, it then doesn't become like a weird conversation and everyone's on the same page with it. Stuff that we don't do yet, but I think is really interesting is job sharing, compressed hours, like reduced work weeks. It's a little bit tricky for us as an agency because there's a whole hours put, and it'd be lovely if we work towards like outcomes and outputs, but it's not quite there yet in the world of work. But job sharing also is super beneficial for those with neurodiversity, because there's certain tasks that people might not do, and I mean general people as well. Everyone has tasks that they're not fans of that some people might be, but having those conversations and understanding where those preferences lie, and even if it's like growth opportunities for people, if there's tasks they want to do for learning and development and things like that, like having those conversations from the beginning just allows for a better way of working, I think.
And how do you manage that? So particularly when you're, I suppose, a really small organization, there's this concept that, we're all going to roll our sleeves up, we're all going to get stuck in. And as you start to grow, I suppose those roles become slightly more defined. But how do you get that balance between, hey, Ali, I know you're super creative and you love this, and if you look at numbers and spreadsheets, you freak out, so it's fine, focus on the things that you're good at. How do you get the balance between where you can make those allowances and you can adapt roles around the individual and their strengths versus actually we're also here as an organization and we have objectives that we need to meet?
Yeah, of course. We've definitely just done this through doing a bit of team design work. So we kind of defined our roles from like levels and disciplines, and then also the roles that you play on like within a project too. So we had these big descriptions that kind of show what's expected of each part. And then we've been doing a lot of stuff with development managers. So making sure that they understand everyone who they manage, like goals and like what they want to get out and what they want to achieve. And something we're going to start to implement soon is if you're not working closely together, having regular catch-ups with the person at the project lead on that project to make sure that if they don't have that relationship yet, the person you manage and the project lead, that you can go in there and be like, hey, this is something that I know they're really keen on. They might not be comfortable enough to share it yet, or this is the learning point for them, and just kind of making sure that dialogue still happens, because definitely when you do grow and you add people in and you don't might not have as much interactions with each other, it is really hard to get to know each other as quickly as like pre-pandemic when you were sat next to each other all the time and there was more hanging out. So just creating interactions like that, I think, really helps. On like a more basic level, we have donuts, so people can always like integrate it with Slack, so those like regular like more one-to-one catch-ups happen. And then every quarter we get together as a company and have everything's kind of cheesy. We've got lots of internal planes puns, so it's called a sortie. It's something I don't know what it really means. It doesn't sound great, it sounds like exit, but it's a nice thing to do with like, I don't know, plain stuff. And it basically means we get together for an afternoon or a full day, we all hang out and we normally like pair people up in different teams they might not have been with, just to make sure everyone does know each other, because it can be a bit scary when you scale and you come and there's faces you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're trying to create the space for those relationships to flourish requires much more intentional leadership than relying on that osmosis effect that happens when we are physically together. Just for clarity, because I think Donut's a fantastic app, do you want to just share quite quickly what the app is? And it's not a physical donut.
Yeah, of course. It's just a Slack integration, and I think it's free, which is pretty good for under a certain amount. I know we're small, so I'm pretty sure it's free for us. And it just, if you're part of the Slack channel within it, that's a donut one, it'll pair you up with someone in there every week. And it's just a half an hour quick chat that gets popped into your diary. It's quite nice for like, I'm a single person on my people team. So like if I work from home quite regularly, there's like people I won't chat to. So I'm always in there to make sure I chat to the team too. But it's quite nice just to have something that isn't project related, work related, and is just two people having a conversation.
Yeah. And when you mentioned trust, and actually I think it's interesting when we think about kind of that, I live by this concept, trust by default, verify by performance, and moving away from kind of, I suppose, productivity and moving towards an output focus in terms of measuring performance. But that concept of trust is so incredibly important. I think that plays a really pivotal role around how successful organizations can be in really embedding flexibility, and it works both ways. And when we look at trust, there's a really interesting, and I'm kind of totally pivoting here, but if you're interested in the concept of trust, a book called The Trusted Advisor, and there's an equation in there that looks at some of the kind of key attributes that trustworthy people have. And intimacy, we know, is the biggest driver of earning trust in a relationship. So being able to have that kind of communication piece, whether that's from manager to direct report or whether that's cross-functionally peer-to-peer, we know is likely to influence trust in a really positive way. But from your take, and particularly from a leadership perspective at Plains, what have the leadership team done to really help foster that high trust environment for this to work?
We've got a trust policy that was created by me and one of the founders. It basically is there to just try and give people a little bit more autonomy. Like if there's a tool that you think is to be better for the project that you're working on, like you don't feel free, like you have to raise up the ranks to purchase it. If you worked more one day and you want to start late the next day, do it. You don't have to ask. Like all those kind of things that gives people autonomy, treats them like adults, allows them to feel a little bit more flexible in their day to day. Is kind of celebrated and shown from top down. We have one of our founders who is more of an office person, but he says like I have to be because that's how I focus, that's how I work. And then we've got other ones who his partner works 12 till midnight because she's a journalist for somewhere else, and he's like, I don't come in before 10:30 because we're going for a walk in the morning. So it's making sure that people, I think, even though we're pretty flat, when you have stories from all levels, it really helps kind of show buy-in and show that people care. Bit of a tangent, but when we introduced Spill, I made one of the founders do a session with them and then share their experiences with Spill for the whole team. So I do think having that like show from the highest level in terms of the team and like say why it's good and say why it's beneficial and celebrate it means that you do build that trust. Because I think there's that weird thing where you can say you can do something, but people feel a bit uncomfortable about it. Like, oh, is it actually a benefit? Is it actually something you can do? I definitely had that because we've been recently interviewing for directors, and they're like, oh, how many days a week do you have to be in? And I was like, oh, there's no like hard and fast rule. And like, sure, but is it 2 days? And I think that's because so many companies have been like, oh, we're hybrid, we're flexible, but actually Tuesdays and Wednesdays are office days, and it doesn't actually allow for people who might have things on those days which they can't get out of, and it doesn't allow for choice.
So if there's people that are dialed in today, because I think that point there around lots of us starting to better understand the ways of working that are working for us post-COVID, particularly if we haven't had a hybrid or a remote first way of working before COVID happened. And let's say that we're trying to do things with the right intentions and we're saying you can work from home 3 days a week, but we need you in the office 2 days. If there's people that are doing that at the moment, and perhaps they're listening to you where you've taken a slightly different approach and they're thinking, you know, I might want to try that. What advice do you have for us in terms of starting to make that shift towards choice?
I would say don't be scared of it, because I think the main thing comes into fear of people never coming in. Like we said earlier, like we're 30, but we probably have around 10 people in the office at any one time. That doesn't seem like loads, but to me, it feels better than on Tuesdays, everyone's in, but then the rest you might not have anyone in. You'd be then paying for a pretty expensive space for 1 day of use a week. I will admit Fridays are very low use now, and I think that's just become a habit, except for when we have our like company meeting. But by having that spread and by letting people decide like when to pop in, if they're coming in at lunch or not, and like not having that fear, which is why I think a lot of people decide to work from home, is like, you know, when you finish work and it's not 6 and you're done and you're not being productive, like you can just go home. Like that should be the case. Like you sitting there in your seat for an extra hour, just being an hour later to get home or not like doing anything, I don't think really makes sense. And it's like that presenteeism of like how you like people used to like decide who was going to get promoted or who's going to get out, who like clocked in first or out. It actually doesn't focus on what they're doing or what they're achieving.
I think we've become we are creatures of habit, and we know that from a neurological perspective, we love certainty, and when something doesn't feel safe or it's an unknown, we try to retreat to an area where things do feel much more comfortable for us. And I suppose the kind of the ways of working is no different to that concept. And I had a conversation with my husband a few months ago, and we were talking about how he started on 35 hours and it kind of got creeped up and there wasn't much choice about when that went to 37 and a half. But broadly speaking, that 37 hours a week is a full-time role. And I'd love to know, at what point does somebody just decide that one role automatically needed one person full-time, and then it's been adopted, and it sometimes can feel quite scary and uncomfortable to look at something that's outside of that 9 to 5. If we're thinking around, well, we want to be much more flexible as an organisation, and perhaps we want to put some of those, I don't necessarily like the word policies, but I think frameworks, or kind of being able to describe what our norms of behaviour are. What are your kind of top tips for organisations wanting to be more flexible?
My first thing is just ask the team. I think that I had a really interesting chat with Molly from Flexa, probably about like a couple of years ago now. And she was like, the amount of people who don't just chat to the team to see what they want. And like you like are beetling away in like the people world, it's like thinking of things that might be nice, but without asking the team, it's like hard to know what everyone's feeling. We did that with we now have meeting free Wednesdays. I was like running one of my quarterly surveys, and a lot of the thing was around like burnout and stress and like meeting overloads and like all these kind of things. And so we had that day as a trial, like presented it to the team as an option. We had like more than one option for them, like that thing was meeting free Wednesdays. Meeting free Wednesdays 1. We then trialed it for a few months, and then we gave them the option to test something out, or did they want to keep with that? And it enables people to feel like they're in control of the decisions that the company are making, and that they have a say in like what's going to happen next. And it's worked really well. I won't say that everyone follows it like completely to the rule of the thumb, but you do get people thinking about it and like being like, oh no, it's that day. Or it allows for like collaboration space. Like our design team have like a 2-hour block that they can use or not use if they just want to like chat about design or like work together and pair. And I think that makes just clearing diaries a little bit, makes it people feel a lot more in control of their day too.
What are some of the kind of benefits that you've built out at Planes? And I know from our conversation that you took a similar approach in terms of asking the team what was most important to them. Where are you at the moment in terms of kind of that benefit suite?
Yeah, so we're probably at like small company benefit suite, because we don't have stuff like health insurance. We don't have like those bigger, chunkier, more expensive ones. But what we do have is we have SPIL, which is our mental health access therapy. We have BIPIT, which is our financial coach. Those two both came out of chatting to the team about what they would like and like what would be the most helpful for them. SPIL, obviously, coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people were dealing with burnout. They were like wanting more help. And I think even being like a mental health first aider, I think having someone separate to the company and separate to your life to chat to who is actually qualified is so important. And the nice thing for me is that they have like check-in surveys that you can attach to any of your meetings, so you get a really good eye on how the whole team's doing, and you can see trends over time, which I think is really useful. BIPIT came from cost of living crisis. A few of the team were like wondering what could be done, what could we do. I found like a few different providers. I listed out what they would cost. I think being super transparent about your budget as well is quite nice. People understand where you're spending money, and I think it doesn't necessarily need to be hidden. And they went with BIPIT, and the uptake of that afterwards was like, I think like 85 or 90. It was huge because everyone had been taken on the journey of why and how. We have things like unpaid leave. I've made it hopefully more inclusive for the fact that it used to be if you took a month off, you didn't get paid for that month, but that's actually quite hard for a lot of people. So you can do like a payment plan and like reduce your payment for like a longer time. So it's not like a huge hit. But then we also like celebrate that too. So one of our designers is very cool, and she's learning to be a snowboarding instructor from January to March. And she's having that time off. But like what we did as a company level was like talk about it and celebrate and say how like awesome we think it is. And all we ask for people is like the amount of time they're going away to give us the amount of time as a heads up, just to have cover. And it means more of our team are doing it now, because before not many people took it. it was like kind of an impossible thing to use, but now it's being like more used by everyone. The other, we just got other standard things like holiday days and, you know, like pension. I can't really talk about because it's like the 8%, which I think is what you have to. But we use things like figures for pay transparency and like gender pay gap and understanding where we are in the market too.
And how do you see that evolving? You mentioned that you're kind of going to be scaling to 40, 50 people. At that point, how do you think your benefit suite might differ or evolve?
For sure. I think we'll probably have to have more within the childcare space. Currently, the stuff we do is obviously like people being able to determine their day. And then if we ever host anything as planes that goes into the evening, that isn't in the working day, we pay for childcare. But I feel like, well, also just because the UK has awful early childcare system and support already, I imagine that becoming more of a thing if we have more parents. And I also think health insurance will become more of a thing, just how the way the world is going, and quite sadly, like the NHS and stuff like that. Like I feel like those benefits will become more important to people. There's some things we won't change. Our bonus structure is like split evenly by everyone. And I've been like told by a few people that senior people might expect to have more, but I do think that is nice because it's probably the people who and the least who appreciate that the most as well. So having it tiered doesn't make too much sense to me.
And that leading by example piece, we know is so important. And I kind of talk about this concept of leaving loudly, and having the courage, particularly when you are in a remote setting or you're kind of working in a hybrid environment, to be open and candid on Slack, like, hey, I'm off, I'm going to go pick up the kids. So something that I try and do, and I don't always do it totally successfully, but is to do the either the morning or the afternoon school runs, so that I get to spend at least 30 minutes with Oliver without any distractions before I go back into work. And I've seen some leaders embody that really, really well. Or, you know, I'm going to go swimming. I'm going to take an extra 45 minutes for lunch because I've got a banging headache, or I'm a bit pissed off with the project that isn't going to plan and I need to clear my head. And just having that kind of role modeled at a senior level, I suppose, showcases that this is normal here, this is okay, and this is acceptable. And I think that links back to your point earlier where you mentioned that you can have things in policies and you can have all of these great kind of benefits in place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to use them or feel safe to use them. And as we kind of go through, if people have questions, like, please do chuck them into the chat. So we record all of these sessions. Probably should have said this right at the start, but you know, better late than never. We record these sessions, but we stop them at the point of asking the questions at the end. So if you've got questions for Sophie, please do pop them in the chat, or if there's things that you're doing to kind of really help foster a greater sense of flexibility in your own organizations, then share them in there. And when we get towards the end, we'll come to them and we'll stop that record button so that it's a super safe space for you to ask them. If we kind of take a slight pivot here and thinking around kind of looking for a new role, I don't know if anybody that's joining us today is looking for a new role, but one of my personal big bugbearers, and I think I've got two, one when I see competitive salary, and I think competitive salary, my interpretation of that, and I could be wrong, is that we don't want to tell you our budget because we're hoping that what you ask for is less than what we were expecting to pay. And the second one is when things like statutory pension are listed as a benefit, and then, you know, they're not necessarily a benefit, they're something you have to do to be compliant. But what are your kind of red flags that we should be looking out for when it comes to flexibility and job searching?
I always think terminology on job specs, like rockstar, competitive, like the ones that kind of allude to the fact that you're probably going to have to be working more hours than you should, and that's going to be celebrated, and that, like, all those kind of hard edging like things that they think are great. I saw something nice from Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's Prime Minister, saying that like people couldn't think she'd be like compassionate but also strong, and it's seeing being compassionate as a weak thing and being empathetic as weak, and then you can kind of see that from job specs where they're trying to be all punchy and hard. I think that's my biggest red flag. Competitive salary as well is rubbish, because you have to create a budget. You know what that budget is, you know what you can pay because of how it affects your net profit, like all those things which are in a budget, and when you're in a spreadsheet you kind of understand what you're allowed to pay and what you have in that range. You're just wasting people's time. Like, you're wasting your own time as well. Like, why have that 30-minute intro chat with someone if you get to the end of the year, what are you looking for, and it's more than you could afford, or you know, anything like that. I feel there's a lot of, it's just just doesn't make sense, I don't think, and it seems unfair. And I think we introduced was a minimum salary policy as well, so we don't pay anyone under 35. It's because we mostly employ people in London. London rent's wild, cost of living is wild, like that it's just hard to live on less. And like, you know, I don't think our government's been particularly nice about what you can do on 30k at the moment, but like having things like that in place just allows for more trust in the team. They can look on our progression framework and see, you know, one end to the other, and then we use Leapsome, which shows ratings, and you can say like you're new to this level or you're pushing for the next, and it becomes very clear, like if you're a fall within a banding and the top is 90, say, you should probably be paid 80, and that conversation then becomes super clear and easy to have. And then it's also easy for the dev manager. There's no nuance, there's no difference of opinion, there removes the bias.
And I suppose with that, pay transparency leaves an opportunity for more conversations around flexibility. And if I'm looking to get to X point, what steps do I need to take, and how can you support me in doing some of that? Or can I use some of the time in my week to study if I need a particular qualification that's going to take me to that next level? If we kind of move on then, and one of the other things that we spoke about yesterday was some of the kind of flexible benefits that we talk about. And we know that life insurance, critical illness, income protection, we know they're expensive, but we also know that that is what lots of organizations like to offer people. And we seeing more and more different platforms. I think Towers Watson has one where it gives people the opportunity to spend their pot in whichever way is most appropriate to them. But we're also seeing lots more untraditional benefits, and so I think you explained a really great one there about being able to take unpaid leave, which I think lots of us would probably describe as a bit of a sabbatical. Interestingly, in my experience, uptake on those has been relatively low, so I'd be really keen to find out a bit more about what it is that you've done as an organization to really encourage people to make the most of these opportunities.
I think that the thing with our unpaid leave that made it viable was having like a payment plan afterwards. That was the most, I think, important one for us. I think also just starting to talk about when people did it, because I was saying to founders, I was like, well, no one's taken it. Like, why are we listing it as a benefit if no one's using it? But then celebrating it when it's being used, it has made more people request it and more people use it. And then I've started to see people not using the whole month, but people saying, I actually, you know, I want to go away for all of January. I'll just take 5 days unpaid leave then. And it's like, or so example of someone taking 3 months, it shows that there isn't a hard limit to it, and you can kind of fix it how you want. You just have that conversation with us early enough that if we did need to get a freelancer or someone in place, then, and it is fine if we need to do that, that isn't a problem. And just being excited when they tell you, like, that's awesome, they're not going to leave, they want to stay, they want to do something cool with their life. Like, work shouldn't be the be all and end all. Like, you should be number one, and work should be the thing that you enjoy doing. So I think making things that you offer like a celebration rather than like, all right, you want to do that. it allows people to feel more comfortable in doing it.
Yeah, blimey, that almost made me kind of think, right, if anybody on here is an expert when it comes to paternity leave, we want to get you on the People and Culture Club, because I think that's one concept there that really kind of touches home. And I remember when we were having our youngest, and he's 2 now, and my husband had a conversation about taking 9 months shared parental leave. And his boss was, and it was genuine. And, you know, I take that there's an element of naivety here, but it was, you know, you get 2 weeks. What do you mean you can have 9 months off? And we know 2 weeks full stop as a dad or as a second parent just isn't long enough to bond with the child. And I think you're right, celebrating those moments, whether that's, you know, extending your family, whether that's learning to snowboard, whether that's another life skill. But you're absolutely right. And I love what I do. And I think most of us probably have a real sense of drive and passion for the roles that we're in, but it doesn't define who we are as individuals. And there's a whole other, there's plenty of other things that kind of tick our boxes outside of work. And interestingly, our next session with Liz Afolabi is around quiet quitting, and this concept of not only are we seeing people physically leaving organizations as a growing trend, but also this concept that whilst people might be physically there, their engagement is dropping, and how likely are we to show up emotionally and even cognitively. And I wonder how kind of that having this culture that allows more choice, and I don't know if there's any research here, or Sophie, what your take on it is, but whether that's one route to help us manage this kind of phenomenon that's continuing to grow.
I think so, because I think, you know, when you're looking at attrition and you're looking, if you're doing all the things that like keep you, the bad word, but competitive, but like you know, you're paying the right salary, you're being open about that, you're allowing people to choose their day, like what are the other things that people are going to look for? And it is that having more freedom to do what they want to do outside of work as well, and having those like growth opportunities. So focusing on how people are going to progress, how people are going to learn, how people are going to stay engaged, really. Like if it becomes monotonous, that's kind of when you start thinking about moving on. So being able to just treating people like adults, I think, is the biggest thing for me. On your point on parental leave as well, we introduced 4 months parental leave for at Plains, and not by luck, I guess, but like both 2 of our founders have had children recently, and they both went back to New Zealand for like 3 or 4 months. One of them's there now, and it really shows that is there in place to be taken, and it is important to take, and they're like very comfortable speaking about it. And it shows how great it is. Like Ryan, when he came back, was like, that was the most valuable time I could have ever had. And it shows how small 2 weeks is. I've had a few friends who've had babies recently, and it's like so bonkers. Like even if you have an emergency C, you're not recovered in 2 weeks. It's mean.
Absolutely, we could totally end up down a complete rabbit hole here. Going back to kind of sabbaticals, I suppose the other end of the spectrum is this concept of unlimited holiday, and that is something that we're seeing increase in kind of accessibility, if that's the right word, is a growing trend. And I hear both sides of the story. Some people love it, some people really don't. I wonder what your take on unlimited holiday is.
I think if you create it intentionally, I guess is the way of saying it. Like if you just say like, oh, everyone's got unlimited holiday. I know Plains did that when they were very small, like tiny, and they changed it to having holiday in places before me. It's because people didn't take enough. But I think if you create it intentionally, say the minimum everyone's supposed to take is 2025, and you have someone who has their eye on that, like we use Charlie HR as our HRIS. I can see when people are going to have days to carry over. I check in on it quarterly just to kind of judge people along. If someone says to me, oh no, I'm saving 3 weeks because I want to go away for November, that's fine. But kind of ensuring that you have someone looking at people to make sure they're taking holiday, and that it doesn't become something that people don't understand the barriers of. So I think having a minimum and then you know, you don't really want someone to take every day off the year. If you have like an around what good looks like, or what you think is a norm, like if that was 40, say, that's also good. I've seen a lot of people who just have done super generous ones and have just gone to like 45. And I think that could be like a happy medium of the unlimited, where you can take a chunky amount, but there is an ambiguity in how much that amount is. But yeah, I think with intentional and clear like understanding of it, and making sure the team know that it's a benefit and not something that is going to be looked at like you're taking a piss if you take loads. I think that's the worry, right? It's like, oh, is it actually a thing that I can do?
Yeah, and I suppose it begs the question, is unlimited holiday then even a thing?
Mm.
You know, can I take every day off for a year because I want to go and travel?
Yeah.
We didn't, but I'm kind
It's
of
almost like it's called the wrong thing, isn't it? I think I saw something from Jess, who's the Whereby COO, and she did a post about unlimited holiday, and I think she called it something else, which was interesting, because I think the phrase unlimited is the thing that's ambiguous, because you know you're actually not able to take every single day of the year off, but it doesn't kind of allow you to think how many you could.
I wonder, we should have done a poll for this, because I'm wondering, for those of you that are joining, what your take on would be if you were looking for a new job. What would be much more kind of attractive to you, having unlimited holiday, or them kind of prescribing that there's, let's say, 40 days of annual leave? Let us know in the chat, because I think that'd be really interesting to see actually what our perceptions are about what is an attractive holiday policy. And the other policy that we're seeing more and more of is around kind of paternity leave. So we talked about paternity leave, but what about paternity leave? Do you want to tell us a little bit more and kind of how this works? Because I know you're a dog mum.
Yeah, I am. I was just straight on it when I knew I didn't have to go into the office. I got her in June. I think she obviously was March when we shut down for the first pandemic. So yeah, I was quite quick on getting a dog. We don't have paternity leave at Plains. We have 2 weeks off. Like, I think I was at a different company then. I just booked holiday, but you definitely need to work remotely. I remember at my old company, someone brought in like a very young, untoilet trained puppy, and it was a bit chaos. So I think if anyone at Plains got a dog, I would just recommend them take a few days off, like, around getting that dog, but then also work from home for like a month or two, because they take a lot of time and they are everywhere. And they're like in their peak chewy naughty stage. So I think yeah, just letting people just, you know, we have that too, like you can just work fully remote or work from anywhere. It's like our work from anywhere policy. If you did have something like that happening, you could just work from home for a month or two. Similarly, if you want to like work from somewhere that has reasonable time crossover, or if you want to change your day to like have, I think we asked for like 5 hours crossover within the UK day. So depending on how strong you want to take that, it's also what we have.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to come to some questions in a minute. So if you've got questions, please do pop them into the chat, and we'll kind of come to you in a minute. I suppose as we're kind of edging towards the end of the session, so before we come to some questions, what are you most proud of at Plains when it comes to flexibility?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what, I really like watching, like if I go into the office, watching the team like move in and out. There's one of our designers, he always goes for a swim at lunch, and he's out for more than an hour. No one's got watching that. Or like people going for like classes around the corner, or people leaving to do childcare pick up or drop off. I think that is, we do actually have people, not taking advantage, that's the wrong phrase, but using the fact that they can be flexible with their days and no one really looking into it. I think that's kind of shows that there is the trust there. We've had people who, you know, lived in London and have now moved out of London, and they don't come in as much, and it's like they're still going to be fine doing their role, they're still going to be doing stuff. And I think that's probably the best thing we've done so far.